There's a specific kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone. You can be in a room full of people, talking, laughing, participating, and still feel completely isolated. Not because no one likes you. Not because you're unlikable. But because no one is with you. Not really. They're talking, but the conversation stays on the surface. They're present, but you're having an entirely different experience of the moment than they are. And you can't explain this to anyone without sounding arrogant. Without sounding like you think you're better than them. But it's not about better. It's about different. And different, when you're intelligent, often means alone. Intelligence creates distance. Not intentionally. But inevitably. When you process information faster, when you see patterns others don't, when you're thinking 3 steps ahead while the conversation is still on step 1, there's a gap. A gap between where your mind is and where everyone else's mind is. And you're constantly managing that gap. You slow yourself down. You wait for people to catch up. You simplify what you're thinking so it fits into the conversation. And sometimes this feels like connection. Like you're participating. Like you're part of the group. But it's not connection. It's translation. You're translating your actual thoughts into a version that's accessible. Digestible. Non-threatening. And in that translation, you lose something. The nuance. The complexity. The actual thing you wanted to say. What's left is a diluted version. Accurate enough. But not quite true. And after enough of these conversations, you realize. You're not sharing your thoughts. You're sharing an approximation of your thoughts. The real ones, the ones that move fast, that connect dots across domains, that ask questions people aren't ready for, those stay inside. Because when you've tried to share them, you've seen what happens. Blank stares. Confusion. People nodding but not really understanding. Or worse, people feeling like you're showing off. Like you're trying to prove something. You're not. You're just thinking. But thinking at a different speed, a different depth, looks like performance to people who don't think that way. So you stop. You edit. You manage. And the loneliness isn't about being physically alone. It's about being mentally alone. Even when you're surrounded by people. There's a phrase people use, dumbing down. And it sounds harsh. It sounds elitist. But if you're intelligent, you know exactly what it means. And you know how exhausting it is. It's not that you think other people are dumb. It's that you're constantly calibrating. Adjusting. Simplifying. Not because you want to. But because if you don't, you lose people. You mention something you've been thinking about, maybe it's a concept, a connection, an idea that's been occupying your mind. And you watch their face. And you can see it. The moment they stop following. The moment the interest fades. The moment they're just waiting for you to finish so they can change the subject. And you learn. You learn to read the room. You learn to gauge how much depth is acceptable. You learn where the ceiling is. And you stay beneath it. Because going above it means isolation. It means being the person who talks too much or makes things complicated or overthinks everything. So you simplify. You make it lighter. You add a joke. You wrap it up quickly. And people are comfortable again. The conversation continues. Everything's fine. Except you're not fine. Because you just spent energy making yourself smaller. Making your thoughts smaller. So that you could fit into a space that wasn't built for you. And you do this so often that it becomes automatic. You're not even aware you're doing it anymore. But your nervous system is aware. And it's tired. Because there's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from never being able to think out loud at your actual speed. From never being able to explore an idea fully without watching people's eyes glaze over. From knowing that the most interesting parts of your mind are the parts you have to keep hidden if you want to maintain connection. And that's lonely. Profoundly lonely. Not because you don't have people, but because the people you have can't meet you where you actually are. Intelligence isn't just about processing speed or complexity. It's also about pattern recognition. You see things quickly. In conversations, you pick up on subtext. Inconsistencies. What's not being said. The dynamics beneath the surface. In situations, you see the likely outcomes. The consequences. The ways things could go wrong. And this sounds like an advantage. And in some ways, it is. But it's also isolating. Because while everyone else is experiencing the moment at face value, you're experiencing multiple layers at once. They're enjoying the party. You're noticing the tension between two people in the corner. They're excited about the plan. You're already seeing the logistical problems no one's accounting for. They're optimistic about the outcome. You're aware of the variables they're not considering. And you can't unsee it. You can't turn off the pattern recognition. You can't experience things simply. So while everyone else is present in the moment, you're partially somewhere else. Analyzing. Projecting. Anticipating. And this creates a distance. Because you're never quite having the same experience as everyone else. They're in the moment. You're observing the moment. They're feeling. You're thinking about the feeling. And when you try to share what you're seeing, the patterns, the likely outcomes, the things you've noticed, people often don't want to hear it. They call you negative. Pessimistic. A buzzkill. But you're not trying to ruin anything. You're just aware of more dimensions. More possibilities. More of what's actually happening beneath what appears to be happening. And that awareness, which should create connection, shared understanding, deeper conversation, often creates the opposite. Because most people don't want to see more. They want to stay in the simple version. The surface level. And you can't. Even when you try. So you're alone in your awareness. Alone in your observations. Alone in a complexity that no one else seems to be experiencing. Here's what makes this particularly painful. Connection at your level is rare. Most social interaction happens at a default frequency. Surface level. Polite. Comfortable. And for most people, that's enough. That's satisfying. But when you're intelligent, surface level feels empty. Not because you're better. But because your mind craves something else. You crave conversations that go deeper. That explore ideas. That challenge assumptions. That move fast without needing constant explanation. You crave the feeling of being understood without having to translate. Of being able to think out loud without editing. Of meeting someone who not only follows your thoughts but builds on them. And when you find that, when you find someone who operates at your frequency, it's profound. It's like finally being able to breathe fully. Like discovering you've been holding your breath for years and only now realizing it. Those connections are rare. And they're precious. And they often don't last. Because life moves people. Circumstances change. And the person who could meet you there, maybe they move away, maybe they grow in a different direction, maybe they were only passing through. And when you lose that connection, the loneliness is sharper. Because now you know what's possible. You know what it feels like to not be alone in your thinking. And going back to surface-level conversations feels even more hollow than it did before. So you search. You hope. You try to find those rare people who can match your frequency. But they're scattered. Infrequent. And in the meantime, you're surrounded by people who are perfectly nice, perfectly kind, but who can't quite reach you where you actually are. And that's lonely. Even when you're not alone. Here's the shame that comes with this. You can't talk about it without sounding arrogant. You can't say, "I'm lonely because I'm smart," without people thinking you're saying, "I'm better than everyone." But it's not about better. It's about compatibility. A fish isn't better than a bird. But they can't occupy the same space. They exist in different mediums. Intelligence is like that. Not better. Just different. Operating in a different medium. And when most of the world exists in a different medium than you do, connection becomes harder. Not impossible. But harder. And you can't admit this out loud. Because it sounds elitist. It sounds like you're placing yourself above others. So you hold it inside. You don't talk about the loneliness. You don't share how exhausting it is to constantly translate yourself. You don't admit how rarely you feel truly understood. Because admitting it feels like a betrayal. Of your values. Of your humility. Of your desire to not be that person. But the loneliness doesn't care about your humility. It doesn't care if you're a good person who doesn't think they're better. It's still there. Persistent. Quiet. Aching. And maybe what helps isn't denying it. Isn't pretending it's not real. Isn't forcing yourself into spaces that don't fit. Maybe what helps is just acknowledging it. Without judgment. Without shame. You're intelligent. That's real. And that intelligence creates certain kinds of distance. That's also real. It doesn't make you better. It doesn't make you worse. It just makes your experience different. And different experiences create different kinds of loneliness. And that's okay to name. If you're smart and you feel lonely, you're not imagining it. The gap is real. The exhaustion of translating yourself is real. The scarcity of people who can meet you at your level is real. It's not about arrogance. It's not about thinking you're better. It's about living in a mind that moves at a different speed, sees more dimensions, asks different questions than most of the world around you. And that creates distance. Not intentionally. Not maliciously. Just inevitably. The world isn't built for people who think the way you do. Most social spaces aren't designed for your frequency. So you adjust. You calibrate. You make yourself fit. And that's exhausting. And lonely. But maybe understanding why makes it slightly less painful. You're not broken. You're not asking for too much. You're not difficult. You're just intelligent. And intelligence, for all its advantages, comes with this cost. The cost of being different in a world that rewards sameness. The cost of seeing more in a world that prefers simplicity. The cost of thinking deeply in a world that moves fast and shallow. And maybe that's just what it is. Not a problem to solve. Just a reality to acknowledge. You're lonely sometimes. And that makes sense. Because connection at your level is rare.